Have you ever interacted with a massive institution, like maybe a hospital network or a sprawling university or even just a multinational corporate bureaucracy?
Oh, absolutely. We all have.
Right. And everything looks absolutely flawless on paper, but your actual lived experience of the place is just a complete disaster.
Yeah, totally.
Like you walk into the lobby and the mission statement about, putting people first is etched in this beautiful frosted glass.
Right. The glossy brochures are everywhere.
Exactly. The brochures are glossy. The online portal has all these reassuring green check marks. But then you actually try to get medical care or resolve a billing problem.
I just get a straight answer from a human being.
Yes. And it feels like you are screaming into an administrative void.
It really does.
You probably found yourself standing there looking around at all these well-dressed, polite professionals, wondering, are they actively lying to me? Or are they just entirely blind to what's actually happening in their own building?
It's arguably the defining frustration of modern civilian life. I mean, truly.
No.
We construct these incredibly complex, highly credentialed systems to care for us, to organize society, to protect the vulnerable.
Right.
And yet so often those very systems seem structurally incapable of perceiving their own failures. They seem to suffer from a kind of localized institutional amnesia the moment something goes wrong.
Well, we are going to answer that question today. For this deep dive, we are exploring a really fascinating theory-building manuscript.
Yeah, it's titled From Contradiction Detection to Constitutional Governance.
Which is a mouthful.
It is,
Okay.
but it's essentially a synthesis of an extended design dialogue focused on how high vulnerability care systems.
And the text looks specifically at mental health systems here, right?
Yes, specifically mental health. It looks at how those systems manage, or really entirely mismanage, the uncomfortable truth.
We should probably clarify right at the top what kind of document we're unpacking today.
Good idea.
Because we aren't looking at a traditional empirical outcome study. We aren't, combing through a spreadsheet of patient recovery rates or financial audits.
No, not at all. This is a conceptual blueprint for institutional design. It's like an architectural rendering of organizational psychology.
And it makes a really profound argument. It argues that institutions do not fail because they lack information.
Yeah.
They don't fail because they don't have enough data points or feedback forms or committee meetings. They fail because they lack a disciplined way to keep uncomfortable truths dangerous.
The phrasing there is critical. Keep truths dangerous.
Yeah.
If we want to fundamentally understand institutional failure, we have to move past the deeply comforting idea of the bad apple.
Oh, culturally, we love the bad apple theory.
We really do. It tells us that if a hospital covers up a fatal mistake or a university ignores a systemic crisis, it's because there's a malicious, cartoonishly corrupt individual sitting in a corner office plotting misdeeds.
The bad apple theory is just so easy to digest, it gives us a clear villain.
Exactly.
You fire the bad apple, you issue a somber press release about your, quote, values.
Right. You maybe mandate a half-day training seminar.
Oh, always the training seminar.
Yeah.
And then the system is supposedly pure again. The cancer has been excised.
But this manuscript argues that simple mustache-twirling corruption is rarely the main driver of systemic harm. Most harm in these environments is perpetuated by good people following the rules.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It is. Instead of hunting for villains, we need to look at what the authors call contradiction governance, or rather the total failure of contradiction governance.
So we're looking at the structural, procedural, often entirely invisible ways that institutions soften, delay, and metabolize the truth to protect themselves from the discomfort of reality.
Yes. Harm certainly happens in individual cases, but those individual tragedies are carried and permitted by recurring, patterned ways of making reality less dangerous to the institution itself.
Okay, before we can even begin to talk about fixing a broken system, we have to understand the mechanics of how it actually breaks.
Right.
If it's not about malicious individuals, if it is about institutional reflexes, we really need to define the term's engagement here.
Let's do it.
The text states that institutional decay is best modeled as contradiction mismanagement. What exactly constitutes a contradiction in this specific framework?
A contradiction here is defined very practically. It's the gap between what the system claims is happening.
Like what the policies dictate.
Exactly. What the policies dictate, what the patient charts record, what the executive dashboards display.
Okay.
The gap between all of that and what frontline staff, patients, and real-world outcomes reveal is actually happening. It's the friction between the official, sanctioned narrative and the messy, lived reality.
So let me give an example. If a hospital policy explicitly states every single psychiatric patient receives a follow-up phone call within 24 hours of discharge to ensure medication compliance.
That would be the official claim, yes.
But the reality is the patient goes home, the phone never rings because the ward is completely understaffed, and the patient ends up back in the emergency room in a state of acute crisis 3 days later.
That massive gaping void between the policy and the ER visit, that is the contradiction.
Got it.
Now, the underlying problem identified in the manuscript isn't merely that these two realities diverge.
Because in any sufficiently complex human system, there will always be gaps.
Right. Perfection is not the baseline. The deeper, much more insidious problem is that institutions possess highly elaborate, deeply ingrained routines for taking that contradiction and neutralizing it. They metabolize it.
Wait, let me unpack this. The use of the word metabolize is fascinating, but it also feels a bit, I don't know, clinical.
How so?
Well, when a hospital or a massive corporation covers up a mistake or deliberately obscures a contradiction, isn't it just a standard run-of-the-mill lie? Why call it metabolizing?
That's a great question. A lie implies conscious, malicious deception. It implies intent.
Okay.
Metabolizing implies an organic, automatic, almost thoughtless process of digestion and neutralization. The institution isn't necessarily plotting to deceive.
It's reflexively reacting to a stimulus that threatens its equilibrium. It makes me think of the human body's immune system. Like, a virus enters the bloodstream, and the immune system doesn't hold a meeting to decide if it hates the virus.
No, it just reacts.
It automatically dispatches white blood cells to attack the invader, break it down, and neutralize the threat so the body can return to a state of comfort and stability.
That is a perfect analogy.
So in this scenario, the institution's immune system is attacking the uncomfortable truth. The truth is the virus.
Yes. The institution's immune system goes to work on the contradiction to maintain its own comfort. A system can collect hundreds of patient complaints.
Right.
It can hold extensive multidisciplinary committee meetings about those complaints. It can generate beautiful color-coded dashboards tracking the resolution of those complaints.
And yet remain structurally profoundly blind.
Entirely blind. In this state, closure becomes easier than care. Politeness becomes easier than consequence. Self-description becomes easier than self-rule.
Wow. Closure becomes easier than care. That hits incredibly hard.
It really does.
Because if my job as a middle manager is to oversee the quarterly dashboard, and a severe complaint comes across my desk, my primary unspoken incentive isn't necessarily to tear the department apart to fix the root cause.
Of course not.
My primary incentive is to get the status of that specific complaint from open to closed, so the metric looks green for the Friday leadership meeting.
And just like that, the system has successfully digested the uncomfortable truth, stripped it of its urgency, and excreted a reassuring metric.
That is wild.
The manuscript introduces a brilliant term for this phenomenon. They call it elegant misrecognition.
Elegant misrecognition.
Yeah, and this is especially prevalent in high vulnerability settings like mental health systems. In psychiatric care, you have a unique intersection of highly subjective language, extreme patient vulnerability, fear, and profound legal authority.
Let's ground that in a physical room so people can picture it. Imagine a nurse on a psychiatric ward realizes a highly vulnerable patient is being discharged without a safe place to go.
Which directly contradicts the hospital's official safe discharge policy.
Right. So the nurse speaks up in the morning briefing. How does the system elegantly misrecognize that terrifying truth?
Well, the institution arranges its procedures and its cultural norms so that the contradiction never results in a hard, binding operational decision. Instead, it exits the room as a vibe.
A vibe.
Yeah, it gets subtly reframed as an interpersonal conflict between the stressed nurse and the attending physician, or it gets summarized into the general atmosphere of the ward.
Oh, like someone might say, well, it's just a very high acuity week. Tensions are running high for everyone.
Exactly. It gets aestheticized. It gets delayed pending further review. The nurse spoke the truth. The truth was physically heard by everyone in the room.
But it was metabolized into something entirely safe and unactionable.
Right. Before it could force the institution to actually halt the discharge and change its behavior.
The truth simply doesn't survive contact with the institution's overwhelming need for operational comfort.
No, it doesn't.
That is genuinely terrifying. It means you can have a massive building filled with genuinely good, highly educated, deeply caring people who are collectively perpetuating profound harm.
simply by following their standard procedural reflexes.
Wow.
Which is why the authors argue we need a completely different analytical posture. We have to stop looking at broad, vague concepts like poor workplace culture or dysfunction.
Because those words are just too soft.
They're way too soft. We have to start looking at the specific mechanical gears of how a system swallows the truth. We have to shatter the single, unified story the institution tells about itself.
Right, because if the institution is essentially gaslighting the public and itself with this beautifully synthesized, unified story of excellence, how do we catch them in the lie?
We have to fracture that story. We have to look at the distinct, conflicting layers of reality playing out inside the building.
And the manuscript introduces what it calls the 5 realities model to do this.
Yes. The authors argue that an institution can never be treated as a single reality. If you engage with a hospital or a university as a single entity, you are already playing their game.
You've already surrendered to their synthesized narrative.
Precisely. You have to break reality down into at least 5 distinct competing layers, and you have to hold those layers apart long enough to see exactly where they contradict each other.
Okay, let's walk through these 5 layers for everyone listening. The first is official reality.
Official reality is simply what the policy manual, the protocol, or the leadership expectation claims should happen. It is the idealized, pristine blueprint of the institution.
Okay, that makes sense. The second is chart reality.
This is how the institution chooses to narrate what happened in its own official records.
So the physical or digital text left behind.
Right. It's the check boxes, the liability waivers, the progress notes.
Third is staff reality.
This is what the frontline workers actually know to be true on the ground. It is what they normalize, what they whisper about in the break room.
What they fear.
Yeah, and the informal, off-the-books workarounds they invent just to survive a brutally understaffed shift.
Okay, fourth is affected person reality.
This is what the patient, the family member, or the customer actually experienced, felt, understood, and had to navigate entirely on their own. It's the raw, subjective experience of being processed by the system.
And finally, the fifth is outcome reality.
This records what ultimately happened out there in the physical world, entirely regardless of what the policies dictated or the charts claimed.
Right, like, did the psychiatric referral actually connect? Did the patient survive the weekend? Did the bridge collapse?
Exactly.
Let's pull this out of the mental health context for just a moment to make the mechanics of these layers universally relatable.
Oh, good idea.
Think of a mid-tier chain restaurant. Official reality is the local health inspector's code and the corporate employee handbook.
Right, so every surface is sanitized hourly, all poultry is kept at a precise temperature, hand washing is mandatory.
Exactly. Then you have chart reality, which is the shift manager's nightly clipboard. At 11 p.m., they check off a series of boxes confirming the walk-in fridge was inspected and the temperature was perfect.
Perfect. And staff reality.
That's the 19-year-old line cook, knowing full well that the walk-in fridge door's been broken for 3 weeks and doesn't seal, so they just shove a heavy bucket of mop water against it to keep it somewhat closed.
Oh, man, I can picture that perfectly.
We've all been there. Then, affected person reality is the customer's dining experience. They thought the chicken parmigiana tasted a little metallic, but the waiter was incredibly friendly and comped their appetizer, so they didn't want to make a fuss.
And outcome reality.
That is the customer waking up at 3 a.m. violently ill with food poisoning.
The danger in your restaurant example is that when a crisis occurs, the institution's immediate reflex is what the authors call premature synthesis.
Premature synthesis.
Right. The regional manager of that restaurant chain will try to mash all these conflicting realities together into one coherent story that absolves the company of liability.
Of course.
If the customer complains about food poisoning, the manager immediately points to the chart reality. Look at our logs. I personally checked the fridge box at 11 p.m.
We followed official reality to the letter.
Perhaps the customer caught a stomach bug elsewhere. They synthesize a defensive story that protects the institution by completely erasing the line cook's reality and the customer's reality.
So the 5 realities model forces us to interrupt that defensive collapse.
Mm.
It demands that we hold the line cook's mop bucket, the manager's clipboard, and the customer's hospital bill on the table at the exact same time.
Yes. The manuscript details the specific severe distortions that occur when an institution allows just one of these realities to dominate its internal governance.
Okay, like what?
Well, if an executive board only ever looks at official reality, like if they just read their own beautifully drafted policy manuals, they suffer from policy mirror illusion.
Policy mirror illusion. I love that phrasing.
Right. They look in the mirror, see administrative perfection, and remain blissfully ignorant that the policy is practically impossible to execute on the floor.
And what if the auditors or the risk managers only look at chart reality?
They succumb to documentation narcissism.
Documentation narcissism.
Oh my gosh. The institution falls deeply, romantically in love with its own meticulous record keeping.
They begin to believe that because they documented a comprehensive care plan using the correct billing codes and formatting, the actual care must have occurred in the physical world.
The chart becomes a substitute for reality.
Anyone who has ever worked in a corporate setting knows documentation narcissism intimately.
Oh, for sure.
If the spreadsheet is perfectly formatted, if the fonts are unified, if the cells are conditionally formatted to show green, the project is declared a resounding success.
It doesn't matter if the actual product being built is literally on fire and the clients are furious. The chart says we are hitting our milestones.
Yes. Okay, conversely, what happens if you only have staff reality?
Well, if the frontline nurses know the medication dispensary is dangerously disorganized, but there is no mechanism to formally report it upward without facing retaliation.
You have private lucidity without public force.
Exactly. You have a building full of highly intelligent, incredibly observant workers who are entirely impotent to change the system. They see the disaster coming, but their knowledge has no administrative jurisdiction.
And if a system overcorrects and only focuses on affected person reality, just the patient's pure experience,
You end up with testimony without consequence.
what does that look like?
The system might engage in elaborate, highly publicized token listening. They might host a town hall, nod sympathetically while the patient cries, and offer a heartfelt apology.
But there is no owner logic applied to actually change the structural outcome.
Right. It's empathy weaponized as a dead end.
Man. And what if you only look at outcome reality? If you just measure the raw statistics of food poisoning or 30-day hospital readmission rates without looking at the other layers?
Then you get a too-late diagnosis without any mechanical understanding.
Because you know you failed. The numbers are terrible.
But you have absolutely no idea how the failure propagated through the official, chart, and staff layers to reach the patient.
You can't fix a machine if you only look at the defective products it spits out.
Exactly. The analytical structure any single year dominate the conversation by default. You have to force them into disciplined, uncomfortable contact.
You have to let them, as the manuscript vividly puts it, accuse one another.
Yes.
Let them accuse one another. I want to linger on that image for a second. The chart says the patient was given a robust multidisciplinary transition plan.
Right.
The affected person reality says they were handed a blurry 10th generation photocopy of disconnected phone numbers as they were shoved out the automatic doors.
And the outcome reality says they were found by police wandering a highway 2 days later.
You lay those three realities on a table and you let them fight it out. You don't smooth the edges. That friction is where the uncomfortable truth actually lives.
And once you understand where to look, in the abrasive gaps between these realities, you need to know exactly what you're looking for. You need to understand the precise taxonomy of evasion.
Because as we established earlier, we aren't dealing with cartoon villains gleefully lying to the public. We are dealing with highly evolved, patterned reflexes.
Right.
The manuscript provides a taxonomy, a categorization of these maneuvers, calling them contradiction families. Let's dig into these because they are so painfully recognizable to anyone who has ever navigated a bureaucracy.
The authors emphasize that the purpose of building a taxonomy isn't just to be academically rigorous or to create neat little boxes for a journal article.
Right, it's practical.
The purpose is to convert these slippery, invisible, deeply psychological institutional evasions into hard, recognizable, reproducible families.
Because if you can name the trick, it can no longer be dismissed as a one-off, bespoke, emotionally complicated incident. It becomes a known, trackable tactic.
Exactly. Let's start with the first family, continuity failure.
Okay, how is that defined?
Continuity failure is defined as an administrative transition without real physical transfer or connection. This is the silent killer in mental health systems.
So imagine a patient is discharged from an intensive inpatient ward. The administrative handoff is flawlessly completed, the discharge summary is typed, the electronic signatures are gathered, the liability box is checked.
The chart reality is pristine.
But there is no real connection made to the outpatient clinic across town.
None. The clinic doesn't have the records, the patient doesn't have transportation, the appointment is scheduled for a month out. The seam between those two care settings is where the patient drops into the void.
It's the difference between throwing a life preserver in the general direction of a drowning person and actually making sure they have a grip on it.
Exactly. The institution points to the chart and says, well, we threw the preserver, our liability ends here, our hands are clean. That is continuity failure.
What is the next evasion tactic?
Complaint neutralization.
Ooh, I think we all know this one.
Complaint neutralization occurs when a formal pathway for grievances exists. Perhaps an ombudsman's office, a patient advocacy portal, or an anonymous HR hotline.
Right.
But it has been designed, either intentionally or organically, merely to absorb pressure, not to generate systemic learning.
It acts as a pressure release valve for the institution, not a steering wheel.
Exactly. The patient or the employee vents their frustration. The institution responds with a meticulously crafted, highly sympathetic letter. The file is marked resolved, and absolutely nothing about the underlying procedure changes.
Every single person listening has received that exact letter.
Yeah.
We hear your frustration. We deeply value your feedback. We are committed to a culture of excellence and continuous learning.
It is a verbal pat on the head while security gently ushers you out the door.
The complaint was successfully digested and turned into public relations copy. Let's move to the next one, which has perhaps the most poetic name in the entire manuscript.
Oh, committee missed.
Committee missed. I love this.
It's a great term. Committee missed names the phenomenon where responsibility, ownership, and accountability dissolve entirely into team language, passive voice, and plural nouns.
It's the corporate shell game of liability. It is never, Dr. Smith made the decision to deny this critical care.
No, never. It's always the multidisciplinary review board evaluated the paradigm, synergized with the care matrix, and collectively determined that alternative pathways were optimal.
It is a linguistic fog machine deployed to obscure exactly whose hand was on the steering wheel when the car crashed.
And if everyone is responsible, no one is responsible. If a massive contradiction is met with committee missed, you cannot hold anyone answerable because the owner of the problem is a plural noun that literally disperses into the ether the moment you try to grasp it.
Right, a board cannot be fired.
A paradigm cannot lose its medical license.
Are the people sitting in these multidisciplinary review boards consciously thinking, let's use plural nouns and passive voice to avoid medical malpractice lawsuits? Or is this just the ambient water of bureaucracy that they are swimming in?
It is overwhelmingly the latter. It is a structural reflex. Bureaucracies naturally and inevitably evolve to protect their constituent members from acute stress, blame, and liability.
So committee missed is a highly evolved, almost subconscious defense mechanism.
Exactly. Professionals learn to speak this way because it is the dialect of institutional survival. But let's look at a slightly more aggressive defense mechanism in the taxonomy.
Metric camouflage.
Metric camouflage.
Creating flattering performance numbers, not by improving the service, but by changing the definitions of the words.
Precisely. You don't undergo the agonizing, expensive work of actually improving patient care. You simply change the baseline of comparison, or you quietly alter the threshold of what counts as success.
So if your hospital's stated goal is to have every emergency patient seen by a triage nurse within 15 minutes, and you are failing miserably because you are understaffed,
You don't hire more nurses.
you redefine the word seen to mean handed a clipboard by the security guard at the front door.
Exactly. And suddenly, overnight, your metrics turn brilliant green. You are successfully camouflaging the contradiction.
It's brilliant in its sociopathy.
It really is.
And then we arrive at what I consider the absolute darkest evasion in this taxonomy: retaliatory recoding.
This one is profound, and it is rampant in high vulnerability care systems.
What exactly is it?
Retaliatory recoding occurs when a frontline staff member surfaces a valid truth signal. They point out a glaring contradiction, they flag a severe safety issue.
Right.
But instead of the institution engaging with the substantive reality of that concern, the institution displaces the entire issue onto the messenger.
They attack the person who pointed out the broken fridge. But they don't do it with a cartoonish threat, do they?
No, they do it elegantly. They don't say, "You are fired for speak the truth, you whistleblower." That would invite a lawsuit.
So what do?
They reclassify the valid operational concern as a psychological or behavioral defect in the employee. They critique the employee's tone, or their cultural fit, or their professionalism. A manager might sit the nurse down and say, "We appreciate your passion for patient safety, truly we do, but your communication style during the morning briefing was highly dysregulated."
It's regulated.
It was abrasive. You are destabilizing the collaborative healing environment of the ward, and we need to put you on a performance improvement plan regarding your emotional intelligence.
Oh, that makes my blood boil just hearing it. Dysregulated, destabilizing. They weaponize the very language of therapy and progressive human resources to completely gaslight the person who is simply telling the truth.
It's incredibly insidious.
You take a substantive, terrifying, operational failure-like patients are being discharged into dangerous situations, and you magically recode it as an interpersonal behavioral problem of one stressed employee.
It is a devastatingly effective administrative maneuver because it is semi-clinical, semi-managerial, and highly politically deniable.
The person who spoke up suddenly finds themselves isolated, defending their own sanity, their own tone, and their own professionalism.
Meanwhile, the original life-threatening contradiction they tried to point out is completely forgotten. The manuscript notes this is how risk-bearing contradictions become safer on paper. The institution has successfully laundered the risk.
Risk laundering. You take a jagged, terrifying reality, you run it through the institutional washing machine of HR speak and committee mist, and it comes out the other side as a bland, solded, perfectly safe narrative about optimizing team communication.
And the true genius of the manuscript's taxonomy is that by explicitly naming these evasions, retaliatory recoding, committee missed, continuity failure, you strip them of their invisibility and their power.
Because when a director tries to say, well, the nurse was just not being collaborative,
A mature, procedurally disciplined governance system can step in and say, "Stop. We recognize this specific maneuver. This is a classic, documented case of retaliatory recoding. We are not evaluating the nurse's tone. We are evaluating the substantive truth of her claim about the discharge policy."
so we have diagnosed the disease, its contradiction mismanagement. We have identified exactly where it hides in the abrasive gaps between the five realities. And we have named its specific symptoms, the taxonomy of evasions. Now we arrive at the critical pivot of this deep dive. How does the manuscript propose we cure it?
This is the best part.
If an institution is a machine built to elegantly misrecognize the truth, how do we force it to look reality in the eye?
The antidote proposed by this design dialogue is radical in its reliance on pure procedural discipline. The core argument is this: truth, if it is to survive, must acquire jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction, like a court of law, it implies authority and consequence.
Exactly. Visibility is simply not enough. This is a trap many well-meaning reformers fall into.
How so?
The authors explicitly state, visibility without jurisdiction produces moral clarity and administrative futility. You can have all the moral clarity in the world. You can have investigative journalists expose the flaws. You can have staff members who know exactly what is broken and who is being harmed.
But if that raw knowledge does not have a hard, legally binding procedural mechanism to force action, you are just shouting at a brick wall.
On the flip side, jurisdiction without visibility produces blind, coercive bureaucracy. You just have rigid rules punishing people without understanding the ground truth. You must fuse the two together.
So how does a fleeting, uncomfortable truth, a contradiction spotted by a tired nurse at 2 a.m., acquire this magical jurisdiction?
Through the implementation of what the manuscript calls the contradiction packet, this is the fundamental unit, the basic ammunition of contradiction governance.
The basic ammunition unit. I appreciate the martial language there. It implies a struggle. It implies that institutional honesty requires force. What exactly is inside this packet?
A packet is a mechanism that takes a messy, emotional, complex, heavily disputed situation and standardizes it into an unignorable administrative object.
Okay, so it's a very specific tool.
It forces the institution to answer highly specific questions. What is the exact contradiction stated in one plain sentence?
Right.
Which taxonomy family does it belong to? Is this committee missed or continuity failure? What is the conflicting evidence between the five realities?
And crucially, absolutely essentially, who is the named owner, Not a committee, not a department, but a specific named human being who is personally on the hook for resolving it.
Yes. And it has a review clock attached to it.
A strict, non-negotiable timeline for resolution.
And perhaps most importantly, a proof of repair standard. The named owner cannot simply reply to the packet and say, we looked into it and we fixed it.
Right, because that's just more missed.
Exactly. They have to prove the repair according to a pre-agreed physical metric.
But hold on, let me push back on this on behalf of anyone who has ever suffered under corporate management.
Go for it.
If we are talking about adding packets and review clocks and proof of repair standards to a hospital ward or a corporate office, that sounds suspiciously like the exact kind of bloated bureaucratic red tape that causes these people to burn out in the first place.
I hear you.
How is adding another multi-page form to fill out not just making the administrative nightmare worse?
That is the ultimate test of this theory. And the expert dialogue makes a profound, razor-sharp distinction between weak bureaucracy and the framework's concept of procedure.
What's the difference?
Weak bureaucracy is exactly what you just described. Endless forms that diffuse responsibility, forms that exist solely to feed the committee mist.
Right.
Procedure, in the context of this governance framework, is the exact opposite. It is the specific mechanical tool by which truth becomes actionable.
Is a weapon designed to pierce the mist.
Yes. Weak bureaucracy allows a severe contradiction to float endlessly in the atmosphere of the institution, being debated in endless meetings.
While nothing actually changes.
A contradiction packet grabs that floating contradiction by the throat, pins a specific human name to it, sets a timer counting down, and demands verifiable proof. It is profoundly anti-bureaucratic in its ultimate effect, even if it utilizes procedural tools.
It aggressively resists the common institutional maneuver where every severe problem is reframed as too bespoke, too context-heavy, or too delicate to be governed.
The packet asserts, no, it is not too delicate. It is a textbook continuity failure. Director John Smith owns it, and he has 48 hours to provide proof of repair or he is in breach of governance.
Okay, that makes sense. Where do these packets go once they are generated? The manuscript organizes this governance into 3 core operational lanes.
Yes. The authors identified 3 primary theaters where institutional truth must be governed. The first is the continuity reality lane.
What does that lane do?
This lane asks the harshest, most physical question. Did the care or the service actually cross the administrative seam? Did the psychiatric patient physically make it from the discharge doors to the chair in the outpatient clinic, or did they vanish?
To measure that, they propose a metric called the vanished in seam rate. That is a metric you cannot camouflage.
You really can't.
It's binary. Either the patient arrived at the next appointment, or they vanished into the void between the 2 systems.
The second lane is the complaint reality lane. This asks a structural question. Does a patient's pain or a customer's anger become actual institutional learning, or does it merely become correspondence?
Do we just mail them a polite, neutralized letter, or do we fundamentally alter the way we operate based on their reality?
Exactly. And the third operational lane,
Tell me.
the truth signal reality lane. This is focused entirely internally on the staff, it asks. Does the institution actively protect the people who surface contradictions, or does it reflexively retaliate against them?
Are we recoding our most observant truth tellers as unprofessional and driving them out of the building?
Precisely. Now, to ensure these lanes actually function, the manuscript emphasizes a practice called glossary lockdown.
Glossary lockdown, which admittedly sounds incredibly dry.
It does.
But when you really think about the mechanics of deception, it is the ultimate power move.
It is the bedrock of fundamental governance work. The authors point out a terrifying reality. If an institution can quietly, subtly redefine the word resolved to mean we sent an email to the void, then the entire governance structure has already failed.
If verified safe discharge just means we handed them a bus token, all your beautiful metrics are a lie.
The manipulation of language is always the first line of defense against accountability. Glossary lockdown means we all sit in a room and agree on exactly what these words mean in physical reality.
And you cannot alter that definition mid-quarter just to make your departmental dashboard look greener.
Furthermore, you have to measure success with metametrics that are incredibly resistant to tampering. You don't just measure patient throughput or call volume, you measure the packet-to-summary severity preservation.
Break down the mechanics of that packet-to-summary severity preservation.
It involves tracking a specific contradiction packet from the very moment it is flagged by a terrified nurse on the ground floor all the way through the administrative hierarchy,
Okay.
to the moment it is summarized in a quarterly report to the board of directors. The metric asks, does the severity of the truth survive the journey upward?
Or does a critical, life-threatening safety failure at the ground level slowly get summarized, softened, metabolized, and laundered at every management tier?
Yes, until it reaches the board as a minor opportunity for protocol enhancement.
You are literally measuring the institution's rate of truth dilution. If a level 10 crisis becomes a level 2 footnote by the time the CEO reads it, your severity preservation is fundamentally broken. The immune system is too strong.
And fixing that requires named bodies and non-waivable rules.
Right.
You need an integrity owner, a contradiction review council.
They aren't there to have endless exploratory discussions about feelings and paradigms.
No, they are there to classify the evasion, assign a human owner, start the review clock, and demand proof. They act as the ruthless guardians against sympathy without action.
Okay, we have the packets, we have the lanes, we have the glossary completely locked down. On paper, in the abstract, this sounds like an invincible, watertight system for enforcing honesty.
It does.
But all these packets and rules and metametrics are just ink on paper without actual flesh and blood human beings to execute them. Who is doing the heavy lifting?
That's the real issue.
Because an institution is only as honest as the people inside it. And as the manuscript points out with brutal clarity, those people are paying a steep physical price.
This brings us to what is undoubtedly the most morally and operationally urgent section of the entire manuscript, the concept of the human substrate.
Human substrate sounds a bit like material science, but it is talking about the psychological and physical reality of the workers.
The overarching insight here is vital. Institutions do not automatically become honest simply because you hand them a better theoretical framework or a new set of rules.
Right.
They become honest, and they stay honest, only if the human carriers of that honesty remain alive, credible, protected, and numerous enough to bear the crushing weight of the system's resistance.
The framework treats substrate risk not as an HR wellness issue, not as a burnout problem to be solved with yoga classes, but as a first-class existential governance crisis.
Truth has human carriers. If the institution damages the carriers, it blinds itself. The manuscript divides these human carriers into fascinating categories. Let's explore anchor wheat.
Anchor wheat. The term wheat comes from the underlying dialogue's stated goal to separate the wheat from the chaff in a deeply compromised environment, right?
Exactly. Anchor wheat refers to those specific, rare actors, teams, or nodes within the system that reliably preserve the unvarnished force of truth under immense institutional pressure.
When everyone else in the room is dissolving into committee mist, the anchor wheat stands firm and says, no, this is what happened, this is the contradiction, and this is who owns it. They hold the line.
But then there is the category of burdened wheat. And this is the concept that I guarantee will resonate with almost every single person listening to this right now.
Let's talk about burdened wheat.
Burdened wheat are strong, highly competent, substantively honest actors who are completely overloaded, deeply isolated, or politically exposed.
They are the individuals who are actually doing the excruciating work of holding the broken system together.
But they are paying for that cohesion with their own health, their own sanity, and their own careers.
Think of your own life, your own workplace. Think of that one hyper-competent, quiet coworker you have.
We all know one.
The one who knows how the legacy software actually works when it crashes. The one who stays 3 hours late to silently fix the catastrophic mistakes the new manager made. The one who actually calls the desperate client back when the automated system drops them.
They are the burdened wheat. And the manuscript introduces a term for them that is just devastating. Shadow owners.
Shadow owners.
Shadow owners are the people performing the real repair work, the real continuity labor, the real emotional heavy lifting, entirely without formal recognition.
Without the title, without salary, and crucially, without the corresponding institutional authority.
Exactly. They are down in the engine room plugging the holes in the hull with their bare hands, while the executive team is up on the deck giving a keynote speech about how unsinkable the vessel is.
This leads to the illusion of false green zones.
Yes. False green zones.
Because if I am the CEO of this hospital and I look at my quarterly dashboard and the emergency department looks entirely green, the metrics are acceptable, the wait times are supposedly down, the lawsuits are minimized, why would I ever be incentivized to change anything?
You wouldn't, because you don't realize it is a false green. The dashboard only looks fantastic because a very narrow, highly stressed cohort of honest people, the burdened wheat, the shadow owners, is silently, invisibly absorbing all the systemic friction, all the extra unpaid labor, and all the fear.
The system is literally parasitic.
It is. It is feeding on the ethical exhaustion of its very best people to generate a flattering, mathematically perfect metric for leadership.
That is an unbelievable indictment of modern management. How does an institution know if it is relying on a false green zone? If the metrics are lying, how do you measure the actual health of the human substrate?
The manuscript warns about a late-stage, highly deceptive danger called temperature loss.
Temperature loss.
It's not just obvious explosive burnout where people quit dramatically or break down crying in the break room. In mature, sophisticated regimes, the substrate can cool long before it physically collapses.
What does that cooling look like?
The operators, the formerly disruptive, passionate truth-tellers, become too smooth. They become tactful. They learn to speak the language of the Constitution fluently. They know how to fill out the contradiction packets, but they lose their disruptive edge.
They lose the fundamental willingness to keep contradiction dangerous because they're simply too tired to fight the friction anymore.
Yes. They stop fighting the current and just learn how to float elegantly downstream with the rest of the debris.
What is the structural solution to temperature loss? As we said, you can't just give them a pizza party or a seminar on mindfulness.
Wellness rhetoric is entirely laughably insufficient. The authors insist on a hard recovery doctrine.
Recovery doctrine.
If you have operators who have been functioning as burdened wheat, absorbing the violent shock of institutional contradictions for years, you have to actively procedurally protect them.
What does that actually mean in practice?
This includes implementing freeze logic, where you literally stop assigning them the hardest, most complex cases. It includes deliberate, forced redistribution of the burden to other departments.
And it includes hardening the packets, right?
Yeah.
So the individual doesn't have to spend their own precious political capital every single time they raise an issue.
Exactly. The packet, the procedure itself, does the fighting for them.
You have to build armor for the people who make the system less blind. All right, let's play this out to its logical conclusion. Let's say you do it. You implement the contradiction packets. You lock down the glossary so no one can redefine failure as success. You fiercely protect your anchor wheat, and you rescue your burdened wheat with recovery doctrine. You have built a robust, fiercely honest system. You have won the game of institutional design, right?
Not quite.
Not quite.
Because according to the later phases of the design dialogue, there is one final, incredibly stubborn layer of institutional self-deception. It is the hardest to crack, the most psychologically complex, and they call it the prestige frontier.
The final boss of institutional honesty. What is the prestige frontier?
The insight here is profound. The claim is not just the cynical, everyday truism that institutions protect powerful, wealthy people. Everyone knows that.
Sure.
The stronger, much deeper claim is that institutions inevitably, almost gravitationally, bend contradiction around what they most identify with. They bend the rules for the things they love.
So it is not just about protecting a powerful CEO or a major donor. It could be a legacy narrative about the hospital's founding, or a highly trusted, charismatic star performer, or a symbolic office that the institution's very identity is inextricably wrapped up in.
Exactly. When a severe contradiction intersects with an object of prestige, the institution exhibits prestige curvature. The procedural rules, which are normally rigid, suddenly begin to bend.
What does that curvature look like in practice? How do you spot it happening?
Well, the pace of the investigation magically slows down. The language used in the internal review becomes much more interpretive, more developmental, more endlessly compassionate.
The hard concept of ownership gets thinner and thinner until it vanishes.
Right. Like when a mid-level unknown nurse makes a medication error, the administrative language is sharp, swift, and strictly disciplinary. The packet is processed in 24 hours.
But when the legendary pioneering chief of surgery makes the exact same catastrophic medication error, the language suddenly shifts.
Suddenly, it's all about understanding the nuanced context of the complex clinical environment and supporting our esteemed team through vital learning opportunities.
The manuscript explicitly says that prestige produces greater discomfort with plain contradiction sentences.
Yes.
You literally cannot force yourself to write the sentence, "The chief of surgery failed to wash his hands and caused an infection." You have to write a 3-page paragraph about the multifactorial stressors of the modern operating theater.
And the mechanical solution proposed to combat this curvature is the parity test and prestige gradient scoring. It is not enough to simply say that prestige cases are eventually reviewed. They must be explicitly structurally compared against matched lower status cases.
It is the ultimate parody question. You look at the agonizing month-long investigation of the star surgeon and you ask, what would this exact case look like? What specific words would we use? And how fast would we move if we stripped away every ounce of this person's status and applied it to a first-year resident?
It is entirely akin to analyzing the criminal justice system. If a petty thief steals $100 from a register, the system processes them with ruthless, mechanical, unquestioning efficiency.
But if a white-collar CEO steals $10 million through complex fraud, the system suddenly discovers a deep, philosophical appreciation for nuance, intent, and protracted legal discovery.
The core physical offense is theft in both instances, but the system's courage to enforce the rule is entirely unequal.
Unequal courage. That is such a piercing phrase.
It really is. The final lie of a strong institution isn't blatant denial, it is unequal courage.
A hospital or a company might be incredibly mature. They might beautifully confess to ordinary, everyday weaknesses. They might have a fantastic culture of humility on the ground floor.
But they will still bend, warp, and delay where they most love themselves.
And that curvature must be explicitly measured. You cannot just lament it as a tragic flaw of human nature. You have to score it.
Because ordinary contradictions become governable first. Prestige contradictions. Those reveal the true, absolute ceiling of your institutional honesty.
This brings us to the final horizon of the manuscript, the asymptote of honesty.
The asymptote.
Let's imagine a theoretical institution actually runs the entire gauntlet. They implement the packets, they protect the substrate, they measure the prestige curvature and correct it. They reach the very top of the maturity ladder. What happens then? Do they achieve a contradiction-free utopia?
Well, the text provides a maturity ladder. It moves from level 1, which is awareness theater, where you have the glossy posters and the language of honesty, but absolutely no jurisdiction.
All the way up to level 5, which is constitutional self-honesty.
Right. But the deep, incredibly dangerous irony the authors point out is that if you actually reach level 5, a new threat emerges. The threat of trusting yourself too much.
Trusting yourself too much.
Yeah.
Because you look at your level 5 badge, you look at your perfectly functioning contradiction packets, and you think, we fixed it. We are the good guys. We are safe.
They call this normalization sedation, or the constitutional lullaby. The contradiction governance system, which was designed to be dangerous and disruptive, becomes just another piece of familiar background infrastructure.
It becomes respectable.
It becomes routine, and therefore it loses its danger.
The Constitution becomes mere decor. You have the posters on the wall about truth and honesty, but it is just museum culture. People learn the vocabulary of the packets without possessing the courage to file them.
The academy teaches fluency without courage. And when self-honesty becomes a point of institutional vanity, you are in extreme danger. Because a perfect maturity score does not mean contradiction has ended.
It is physically impossible to end contradiction in a complex, chaotic human system.
A perfect score just means the regime is currently exceptionally good at governing its own drift.
So what does this massive conceptual architecture actually mean for you, the listener? What is the ultimate takeaway? It means the goal of reforming a hospital, a government agency, or your own corporate workplace isn't to build a flawless, utopian world where mistakes never happen.
Utopias are just lies with better marketing.
Exactly. The goal is to build a world where nothing important gets to be comfortable forever.
The fundamental shift is from the illusion of purity to the rigor of answerability. The authors call it the asymptote of institutional honesty. In mathematics, an asymptote is a line that a curve approaches infinitely but never quite touches.
You will never, ever reach perfect purity. An honest institution will still bend occasionally. It will still suffer from committee mist. It will still narrate itself too generously sometimes.
But the crucial difference is, in a mature system, that bending remains visible and governable.
To prevent that constitutional lullaby, you need constant aggressive stress tests.
Founder removal tests, prestige parity drills, hostile external audits, these are not signs of a weak system. They are the active physical practice of a strong regime deliberately distrusting its own ease.
You have to keep the muscles of truth-telling under intense, continuous tension, or they will absolutely atrophy into polite administration.
Right.
This has been an incredibly dense, rewarding, and frankly, unsettling journey. Let's trace the path we just took to tie all these complex threads together. We started by diagnosing the real disease. It's not a few bad apples, it is the deeply ingrained institutional reflex to metabolize and neutralize the truth.
We then shattered the institution's single narrative by holding the 5 realities apart: official, chart, staff, affected person, and outcome, and forcing them to accuse one another to reveal the true abrasive gaps in care.
We mapped the evasions, we learned how to spot the linguistic fog of committee mist, the gaslighting of retaliatory recoding, and the illusion of metric camouflage. And we countered them by giving truth absolute jurisdiction through the strict, timed, owner-bearing mechanism of contradiction packets.
We recognize the profound human cost, the absolute necessity of protecting the burdened wheat, the shadow owners who silently carry the weight of reality, and ensuring we aren't just running a parasitic false green dashboard powered entirely by their ethical exhaustion.
And finally, we confronted the prestige frontier. The reality that systems will always bend for what they love, and that true maturity requires unequal courage to be made equal, constantly fighting against the sedation of thinking we have finally solved honesty.
It is an architecture designed specifically for keeping truth dangerous.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The perfectly polished lobby of the massive institution, the frosted glass, the glossy brochures, the polite professionals. The next time you walk into one of those buildings, you won't just stand there wondering if they're lying or blind. You will know exactly how they're metabolizing the truth right in front of you. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. Bring this massive framework out of the abstract and directly into your own life. Think about your own workplace, your own community organization, or your own department. If a ruthless contradiction packet system was implemented in your world tomorrow morning, complete with a named human owner, a strict ticking clock, and a rigorous, unfakeable proof of repair standard, what is the very first uncomfortable truth that would finally be forced out of the committee mist and dragged into the light? What specific daily reality has your system been elegantly misrecognizing, and who right now is silently carrying the burden of that truth? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of self-honesty. Until next time.